So, medieval historian breaks down Scotland versus England. We'll give him a like preemptively and let's check it out.
The year is 1314. We're 18 years into the First Scottish War of Independence.
Wow.
William Wallace is dead.
Oh.
Robert the Bruce is trying to make himself King of Scotland. Edward II in England is bringing north the largest English army ever to invade Scotland.
You know, I do appreciate, sorry to interrupt him already after 23 seconds, very serious, by the way. But one thing I will say that I very much appreciate is this. They are not using AI. And there is so much AI slop when it comes to already entire channels. But look, they take the time, they find the iconography, they cut it, they do a little animation. I appreciate that.
Is bringing north the largest English army ever to invade Scotland.
Okay.
Everything will come down to one pivotal battle. I'm Matt Lewis, and this is Battle Command. When
Okay.
Alexander III, King of Scotland, died in 1286, it began a series of crises for the Scottish crown.
Yeah.
The feuding was so intense that eventually the Scots invited King Edward I of England to arbitrate between all of them.
Cool.
Eventually, in 1292, he selected his favoured
Wow.
candidate, John Balliol, who ruled very much as Edward's puppet and became deeply unpopular. He found it impossible to remain King of Scotland. Edward would use all of this as an excuse to assert his overlordship of
All right, I'm gonna have a look at the props here. I love the special effects. This mace, I actually own it. I know exactly what this is. And it's actually a poor replica. It's cheap stuff. While it looks nice, it does. It looks pretty nice. The original at the museum has much thicker flanges. Like I'm talking 4 times the size. So this, instead, they made it into very thin flanges that kind of turn it into almost like a stabby weapon, whereas clearly this is not. And I know exactly which example this is. I think it's in the Wallace collection. The second problem is that this breaks because it's completely empty inside, but the quality of the metal is quite poor. So if you use it as a prop, I guess it's fine. But if you smash it against anything, it's gonna bend and break.
Scotland. He took an army north and swept
I love that,
the
though.
kingdom,
Man.
taking control of virtually all
Praise them when it's appropriate, right? I want to praise them. I love the animation.
of Scotland himself.
Cool.
He initially faced a rebellion from the famous William Wallace,
Yes.
Braveheart.
They were in blue.
William initially had successes, including the Battle of Stirling Bridge, but then setbacks at the Battle of Falkirk.
Yes.
Eventually, all of the Scots lords began to fall into line behind Edward I, and Wallace was left alone, isolated, eventually surrendered to the English, taken back to London, and subjected to the horrific execution of being hanged, drawn, and quartered.
Absolutely. I'd like to underline when it comes to the movie, however. One, first and foremost, the movie, of course, has a lot of incorrect history in it. But one thing that, if you remember, that I would like to point out is the jus primae noctis. And you have seen this in all sorts of shows, this idea that a medieval overlord, they would just see, oh, the peasants are getting married, the wife is kind of cute, I claim my right through the church, I claim my jus primae noctis, the right of the first night, so that she needs to sleep with me before she sleeps with her husband. That never existed. It's not a thing. Freedom.
Edward must have thought that his job was complete. Scotland
Yeah.
was now his entirely. But amongst the ashes of William Wallace's rebellion, an ember still glowed. That ember was Robert the Bruce.
Yeah. Aha, he's starting with the miniatures. Let's go.
Robert was the senior member of one of Scotland's most important remaining families. His grandfather had been part of that group of men who had initially submitted their claims to Edward I of England.
Thank you,
He
Giants.
kept his head down during Wallace's rebellion.
Yeah.
But now, he must have felt that the road was clear for him to make the Bruce claim to the throne.
Still, man, the courage on these men, am I right?
subscribe. Now had only one other possible rival for the crown of Scotland, a man named John Comyn. John didn't mind Edward retaining overlordship of Scotland if it meant that he could become king. Robert, by this point, was committed to driving the English out of Scotland altogether. The two had a secret pact that whoever won the crown, the other would give him all of his lands and titles to bolster his position as king. Robert and John arranged a meeting at the Greyfriars Church in Dumfries.
Oh yeah, this is famous.
The two men went in alone. Matters must have got heated
Yep.
because eventually, at some point during the meeting, Robert drew his knife and stabbed John Comyn to death.
That is insane, actually, from a medieval perspective, because you see, not only, I think we all know the idea of church is sacred ground, so you don't do that. That was like completely no. But also do keep in mind that from a medieval perspective, I'm simplifying a little bit, but from a medieval perspective, church and the division between church and state makes absolutely no sense. The church was always involved in the affairs of the state. State, when I say state, I mean, of course, like the secular nobility. In fact, there were a lot of clashes between the Holy Roman Emperor and the Pope. They were like, no, I have power over this. Like, no, I have power over this. No, you don't. Yes, I do. So that kind of stuff happened constantly. It was a continuous like, yeah, but I am more powerful than you. Right, but my authority is more important because I have the lineage. Yeah, but my authority comes from God. So your lineage was created by God. Hence, I am more important than you. And that kind of stuff was all over the place. So stabbing someone at a church was crazy, not only from something that we can understand, like a sort of sacred Christian perspective, but also from the ideas of the law, because the two things are connected. A lot of the taxes that peasants were to pay, some they would pay directly to the lords, others they would pay to the church. And in fact, it was the church that was oftentimes deciding, you get this holiday now. So it's very much intertwined.
Had both an opportunity and a problem. The opportunity was that he was now the last claimant to the Scottish crown standing. His problem was that he'd just murdered his rival on sacred ground.
Yep.
This was a sin that would need to be washed away if he was to finally become King of Scotland. Running a YouTube channel like ours means managing a lot of moving parts and ongoing conversations.
Yes.
But whether it's a work meeting or an ideation session, it can be tricky to note down absolutely everything. The Prelude Note is a credit card-sized AI assistant designed to solve this. And it really is credit card-sized. It even comes with a magnetic case that you can magnetically attach to the back of your phone, and you forget
Okay.
it's even there. With just the press of a button, you can capture high-quality audio of whatever conversation you're having. And you can add...
Man, if Edward the Bruce had that, or William Wallace, things would be completely different, am I right?
Add photos and jot down your own ideas too. The battery will last for 30 hours continuous audio capture, 60 days standby, and it has 64 gigabytes of storage capacity. And then the Claude app transforms it all into structured summaries with 3,000 templates with clear to-do lists and key insights. Another great feature is Ask Claude. It can combine the info it's captured, even from the past, to answer any question, like what were the most popular ideas in the last video brainstorm. It also drafts emails and to-do lists, helping me see meetings from a clearer, more complete perspective. And you might be wondering, is my data really secure, especially for those in sensitive or confidential professions? Claude keeps your information protected with top global compliance standards like SOC 2, GDPR, EN 18031, and HIPAA. At the same time, it helps us move toward a more paperless workflow. Everything is stored and organized digitally, which is both efficient and environmentally friendly. So if you want to make the most out of every meeting, Claude would be right for you. Click the link in the description to learn more.
Use code HIT10.
For a Christian, shedding the blood of another Christian on sacred ground within the walls of a church
Yeah.
was sacrilege.
Yes.
It was a serious stain on Robert's character, and everybody would know about it. The whole of society was devoutly Christian. Not
Yeah.
only that, but the church, led by the Pope in Rome, had influence over the role of kings too. If Robert was going to be the
Absolutely.
strongest that he could possibly become, he knew he needed papal backing and the church on his side. That meant getting the stain of this sin washed away.
It's a bit like what I was telling you the other day when we were discussing the fact that, you know how in ancient Rome, you're either a Roman or you're a barbarian. And that's kind of the more sophisticated, it involves citizenship and all that stuff, version of us versus them, inward versus outward, tribal versus possible enemy. It all stems back to that. It's a more sophisticated version. Well, in the Middle Ages, they had the same concept of like a Roman citizen versus barbarian, but it was Christian versus pagan in the Middle Ages. And in fact, it would transcend cultures. Like you could be from Genova and you could be from England or Mercia, if you will, but if you're both Christian, in theory, you would be part of the same group. Reality is that, of course, Christians still murdered each other, which is why the Pope tried to ban stuff. Is like, you know what? This murderous art of crossbows and bows, everybody forgets that. Everyone is like, oh, the Pope in the Middle Ages banned crossbows and bows. Like, these are, it's awful, detestable to God. You shouldn't use it against Christians, which means two things. Thing number one, you can absolutely crossbow to death a pagan. Not a problem. And thing number two, you can spear each other to death, but do not crossbow each other, because that is detestable.
Robert's only hope is to seek absolution from the church. He arranges to meet the bishops of Scotland at Glasgow. They agree to absolve him of the sin of Comyn's murder, provided that as King of Scotland, he promises to protect the Scottish church. Robert is only too happy to agree to this condition, and is set free from the weight of the sin he'd been carrying. From there, he moves to Scone, the traditional site for the coronation of Scots kings. One problem that Robert had when he got there was that Edward I had previously taken away all of the Scottish royal regalia, as well as the famous stone of Scone, the Scottish stone of destiny on which Scottish kings were traditionally crowned. So it was something of a makeshift coronation, but nevertheless, in 1306, Robert the Bruce had declared himself the new King of Scotland.
Goodness gracious, it's Skyrim all over again, isn't it? If you're enjoying this video so far, please take a moment to check out my Patreon page. With as little as a $5 support, you can help us ensure that we can continue to produce high quality and high researched content. And at the same time, you get access to polls, extra videos, unlisted streams, and much more. Thank you so much. Love the editing.
Back in London, when news of Robert's coronation reaches Edward I, he's absolutely furious. He thought he'd put this matter to bed once and for all. Now, in his mid-60s, having faced 10 years of rebellions in Scotland, he was going to have to do it all over again. Edward has been King of England for more than 30 years by this point. Before he became king, he'd been on crusade to the Holy Land.
Look at that.
He was a gifted military tactician and warrior. He conquered Wales in a way that no King of England had managed before. And as far as he was aware, he'd added Scotland to all of that too, so that the whole British Isles owed him allegiance. On top of this, he's still technically at war with France and would love to focus his energy and efforts across the Channel. And so he was even more angry at being dragged back to deal with fresh problems in Scotland.
Now you see why the Romans decided, fuck it, I'm building a wall. I don't want to deal with Scots. They're absolutely nuts.
As Edward sets about mustering an army, he sends ahead of him his son, Prince Edward, and Aymer de Valence to begin to deal with Robert's rebellion, while Edward himself remains in London to continue his preparations. Edward sends his son and Aymer ahead of him up to the Scottish border. They march under the dragon banner. The dragon banner was something used by the English when they meant to give no quarter on the battlefield. It was raised against rebels and traitors. It meant that anyone who faced a royal army could expect no mercy. They would pay for their treason with their lives. Aymer set about harassing Robert's forces in Scotland. At one point, Robert barely escaped a nighttime ambush with his life. Eventually, the two would meet at the Battle of Loudoun. Here, Aymer had the numbers. He should easily have defeated Robert. This could have been the end of the reign of Robert the Bruce. But this was the...
So when it comes to that movie, by the way, that I have reviewed, let me see if I can very quickly, where is he?
Aymer had the numbers. He should easily have defeated Robert. This could have been the end of the...
Yeah, this is the Outlaw King, exactly. Outlaw King was pretty decent, I have to say. The equipment, the armor was pretty good. I think there was one scene that I felt like, why? Which is, there is this cavalry charge. If I remember correctly, sometimes I get confused between the Outlaw King, the King. I imagine the next one is going to be called just King. There is this cavalry charge, and I think it's the English, and they're charging, but with swords, and no one has a lance, which I thought was weird. So that's the only thing. But apart from that, when it comes to the equipment, yeah, look, this looks pretty decent. I mean, look at the mail. Looks good. You've got a jack of plates. The thickness of the heater shield is really good. And it's fully covered in parchment and probably gessoed, I imagine, and then painted. Even the system of the strapping system seems to be correct because you have several versions. You can have like a completely vertical one, you can have it oblique, and you can have it horizontal. So really, you can't really F it up unless you do like something weird like held in the middle, which was not a thing with these kind of shields.
But this was the turning point. The moment of luck that Robert needed to establish himself as king. Somehow, against all of the odds, he managed to defeat Aymer's army.
Yeah.
And the English were driven away from Loudoun.
Yeah, never mind Dragon Banner.
But in the meantime, Prince Edward has made his way up to Kildrummie, where he'd managed to capture members of Robert the Bruce's family and take them prisoner. King Edward is by now ready to bring his army up to Scotland. But he only makes it almost to the border when ill health overtakes the elderly king and he dies.
Goodness gracious, can you imagine that?
Prince Edward is then forced to return to London, where he will undergo the coronation that transforms him into King Edward II.
I'd say the English are going to be a little pissed after this one, wouldn't you say?
Edward II is remembered as a terrible King of England. He's deeply disinterested in war. He has no desire to pursue his father's efforts to conquer Scotland or fight with France. When he first gets to London, he finds his court is riven by faction, and so he's distracted from any effort to do anything other than establish himself on his new throne. Meanwhile, in Scotland, Robert uses the space that this creates to drive the English out and take control of almost all of Scotland.
Man, this is a shit. Well, I love it. It's probably like my favorite video so far when it comes to History Hit. I love the freaking blue and red animation. Feels like I'm playing a video game.
The last two strongholds still in English possession were Bothwell and Stirling, the gateway to the Scottish Highlands. In 1314, Robert decides that Stirling will be his target. Bothwell is secluded. Stirling has much more strategic importance and significance. It's a place from which Edward might be able to launch an effort to reconquer the whole of Scotland. And so Robert sends his younger brother Edward Bruce to begin the siege of Stirling Castle. Edward was a chivalric man. He arrived at Stirling Castle and the English inside realised that they couldn't hold out for very long against Edward's forces. They began negotiations and Edward agreed to terms. If no English relief force had arrived by the 24th of June, the castle would be surrendered to Edward Bruce.
So before we continue, 1248, look at this piece of iconography. Images like this are very typical, particularly of the so-called Morgan Bible. And what's interesting is that if you notice, of course, they're wearing mail, but did you notice that it looks like they're wearing mail on top of their heads? But look at the way it's shaped. And the reason for why it looks a little odd when you look at it is because they are wearing helmets underneath the mail. And I know that that sounds weird, but it was a thing. It was more popular to have the other way around. So you have the mail underneath and then the iron skull on top of it. But this is also a configuration that existed, which I thought was interesting to point out. And I love the shields.
If no surrendered to Edward Bruce. Now, the clock was ticking for King Edward II of England to do anything about this. Edward II back in London is
You see, that's exactly what I meant. Man, look, now that his coif is lowered, you can see the iron skull.
What might well have been the largest army ever to invade Scotland, estimated to be about 20,000 men.
Wow.
And he's all but ready to move north. Edward II brings up his huge army ready to assault Scotland, Robert knows that he can't stand against this English army in an open field, and so he withdraws, operating a scorched earth policy as he goes, destroying crops and any provisions that the English might be able to use to sustain themselves. The one thing that he does know is where Edward II is heading. That means that Robert will be able to select the ground on which they'll fight. The place that Robert decides that he will face the English is at Bannockburn, just to the south of Stirling Castle.
Hey, we got another map. Let's go. Man, this is great. I'm happy that I liked it preemptively.
And there's very good reasons why Robert selects this piece of territory. Bannockburn lies here. There is a ridge of high ground here at New Park, and this is the straight road through to Stirling Castle that Robert thinks the English will have to take. It means that he is in control of the terrain.
Yeah. 23rd of June, 1314.
On the 23rd of June, 1314, the day before the expiry of the deadline for Stirling Castle to be relieved, Robert the Bruce is arranging his men here in some woods. He knows that this will give him cover from any English cavalry attack. On the horizon, he can see the arrival of this immense English army that Edward has managed to muster. He's got men at arms.
Yeah.
He's got plenty of English heavy cavalry with him too. And there'll be a few archers thrown in there as well, because what's an English army without its archers?
True. Look at those brigandines.
Robert can see them approaching on the horizon, and they move to cross the Bannockburn here at this point, hoping to head straight to Stirling Castle. This cavalry contingent is led by the Earls of Hereford and Gloucester, and amongst their numbers is a man named Henry de Bohun too. They try to ford the river, but here they encounter the first of Robert's traps. He's had his men dig pits all along the other side of the river so that the English cavalry can't come across with their full width in full force. They're forced to narrow their numbers to make their way across the river. And as they're beginning to move across, Henry de Bohun spots Robert the Bruce on a small palfrey horse, a riding horse, carrying an axe, talking to his men, completely unprepared for battle. Henry de Bohun spots his moment for glory. He could end this fight in a moment and kill the rebel King of Scotland. He drives his spurs into the side of his warhorse and begins to charge across the field towards Robert. Let's take a moment to think about what Robert has to gain or lose here.
Robert could be captured, or worse, die. Leaving the rebellion without its spark, Robert's supporters, his own imprisoned family, would be left to face the wrath of Edward.
Undaunted, the Scots king drives his own horse into a gallop and rides out to meet de Bohun in the middle of the field.
Man, the courage on these medieval men is insane. I want to give you this perspective. You know what this is the equivalent of? This would be the equivalent of, say, that there was a war between the current United States and the UK. All right, let's think about it for a second. That would mean Starmer and Trump meeting in the middle of the battlefield to fight in hand-to-hand combat with swords in armor. Literally, that's the equivalent of this, but for the medieval period. Can you imagine that? Like the charger going like this, like that. And they were young.
Henry de Bohun has his lance couched. He's ready for a full charge.
Yeah.
He's aimed squarely at Robert's chest. But as the two come close, at the very last second, Robert stands up in the stirrups of his saddle and allows the lance to glance past his side.
Man.
At the same time, bringing down his heavy axe on top of de Bohun's head. The blade cleaves through his metal helmet and into his skull. As his horse rides on, Henry...
So that was a armor failure. Crazy that would happen, because I mean, an axe managing to cut through, they must have cut through the helmet and the mail underneath. Man, how strong was this guy? That's insane. I mean, I guess armor can fail. It's not like it's impossible, but you would think that the helmet of a prince, of a leader, would be the best. So that's insane. You know what must have happened? Because armor has different thickness. It's not uniformly thick. And it's thicker in those areas that are exposed to statistically more attacks, but it's thinner on, for example, the side or the visor. So there are sections of armor that are usually thinner because in theory should be harder for, and so this, I mean, either it was a great shot. We'll have to give him that. The English prince that died here, I mean, honor to the guy. I gotta give it to him.
De Bohun slips from the saddle, dead.
Boom, dead. One shot.
The English see this and are dismayed at the loss of one of their leading knights. In contrast, the Scots are buoyed.
Yeah.
Some men-at-arms charge out from the woods to
imagine
join their
the
king,
morale
and they
boost.
begin to attack the English as they're trying to ford the river. Meanwhile, another English cavalry force has moved further south and crossed the river with the intention of flanking the Scottish forces. But some of those in the woods move out to protect the king.
Of course.
Under the leadership of Robert's nephew, the Earl of Moray, they form a schiltron. A schiltron is essentially a stationary defensive position. It looks something like a hedgehog or a porcupine. Its spears pointed out towards the enemy to put off a cavalry charge. Horses won't want to plough into that field of blades.
You have to have high discipline to pull that one off, though. Just want to underline that. When you receive the charge of cavalry, untrained infantry will run. And the moment there is disarray, it's lost. They get butchered like animals. But if you have really highly trained, at this point, semi-professional forces when it comes to your infantry, then in reality, as even a solid shield wall, and even more so this, the porcupine formation, can be really difficult to disrupt with a cavalry charge. But they have to stay at night, because the moment there is a breakage, then the cavalry goes in, and it's the end of it. So you really need to have trained but again, the morale must have been extremely high, because, I mean, we just effed up our king.
The English cavalry charge at them, but find themselves unable to pierce the thick forest of blades aimed at their horses. And eventually, they're forced to withdraw back the way that they came. Cavalry forces are finding it impossible to cross the river against the Scots. And they also are forced to withdraw.
What a mess.
The first day of the Battle of Bannockburn has gone the way of the Scottish. The English are now forced to find somewhere to camp, to lick their wounds, and to wonder how they're going to put this right in the morning.
Yeah.
The English establish their camp just down here for the night. And during the night, there are intense discussions about what they ought to be doing. Edward II's nephew, the Earl of Gloucester, tells his uncle that he thinks they ought to take a bit more time, that they ought to be more careful about what they're doing and plan, and refuse to engage the Scots immediately. Edward II is furious with Gloucester and accuses him of being a coward and a traitor. Gloucester tells his uncle that in the morning he'll prove he's no coward.
Aha. Man.
And now we're going to take a closer look at the field on which the second day of the Battle of Bannockburn would be fought. We're going to zoom into the bit.
And I thought that those were just props.
Where the action is going to take place.
Action, let's go.
On the morning of the 24th of June, 1314, the two armies began to line up, ready for battle.
Yeah.
The Scots had 4 divisions of men-at-arms forming up their schiltrons. The commanders of these 4 groups of men were the Earl of Moray, Robert's nephew.
Look at that
the
image.
Earl of Douglas, Edward Bruce, Robert's brother, and Robert the Bruce himself.
You gotta give it a second. Give it a W in chat at least. A round of applause for not only, I mean, his preparation, because he must have taken time to review all the data, all the dates and their names, so you don't get confused. So his presentation is top tier.
They also had a small contingent of cavalry at the back, led by Sir Robert Keith.
Seeing the Scottish army kneeling on the horizon, Edward confidently said, "Those men kneel to ask for mercy." But a Scottish knight fighting with the English responded, "They ask for mercy but not from you. They ask God for mercy for their sins.
Yep.
I assure you of this, those men will win all or die. None will flee for fear of death. Edward simply responded, so be it.
So be it,
The
man
English
of your
were
words.
also busy deploying their forces onto the field. Edward had decided to go with heavy cavalry at the front,
Okay.
backed up by his men-at-arms, and also with a contingent of archers. Some of
What do we think? What do we think of this deployment, guys? We need to talk about this. Come on, let's strategize. Where did he place the archers?
his English and Welsh longbowmen too.
Okay.
Interestingly, having accused his nephew Gloucester of being a coward, Edward II himself would take up a brave position at the back of the army on the other side of the river,
Yeah,
well out of harm's way.
sounds
Way
good.
to go, Edward. The scene was now set for the Battle of Bannockburn. Let's have a moment to think about some of the key units that are present on this battlefield.
Let's
The
go.
Scots had between maybe 5,000 and 8,000 men in the field. The numbers in medieval battles are notoriously hard
Yeah.
to give with any kind of certainty.
Of course.
The Scots
And a little bit,
had their spears.
I'd like to underline, and a little bit with Roman data as well, because we know they exaggerated. Sometimes to really be almost certain of numbers, you have to try to see, okay, so the Romans, that's what they said, but what did their enemies say? And did someone else, like a Greek historian, mention this? And you put all things together, try to combine it with previous military reports. It's not easy to know the exact numbers, though, because propaganda does sift through these things, and it is what it is.
Hard to give with any kind of certainty. The Scots had their spears to form their schiltrons. They were fairly lightly armoured. As much as I love Braveheart, they are not fighting in kilts, and they have not painted their faces.
Yeah, it's nonsense. I mean, this is picked. This is ancient classical antiquity stuff.
The English, on the other hand, had maybe 20 to 25,000 men, 4-5 times as many
gracious.
as the Scots, all encased in heavy armour. These were the tanks of the medieval battlefield.
Yeah, you see the difference in economic backbone. It's insane.
Lining up at the front of the English army, and the English longbow was one of the most devastating weapons available at the time too. The English must surely have felt confident. They had the numbers,
course.
they had the equipment. Surely
Yeah.
they were going to defeat the Scots this time. At this point, it's quite hard to work out who might win this battle. Morale was definitely high on the Scots side after their victories of the
Obviously.
previous day, but the English had overwhelming numbers and their devastating heavy cavalry. It was going to come down to whether these defensive schiltrons could hold out indefinitely against the charge of the heavy cavalry and the weight of the English archers. If I had to put money on anything, I'd probably be betting on the English at this point.
Right, but then an ancient Roman would resurrect from the dead and tell you, no, don't fuck with them, build the wall. Just don't fuck with the Scots. Build the freaking wall.
By Bruce's
Okay, so he's gonna, at the end of the video, it's all his perspective and stuff, the casualties. Appreciate that. I'm gonna leave it at this, but I loved the video. And of course, once this gets edited, we will put a link to the original channel so that people can go and finish it. But it was fantastic, fantastic. Wonderful way to start the stream, I have to say. Really enjoyed it.